Okay, so, are you ready for a spooky one?
Oh, yeah.
Today we're diving deep into Alien. Isolation, to figure out what makes it such a modern horror classic.
Right.
And you've given us some really interesting material on it, so clearly you've got a taste for the terrifying.
Yeah, I think to really understand what makes Alien Isolation so effective, um, you have to look at how it goes beyond those, those typical horror tropes.
So it's more than just jump scares then?
Yeah, exactly. Gets under your skin in a way that few games can.
One source even called it one of the most intense survival horror games ever made.
I can see why they'd say that.
What really struck me was how much emphasis is placed on isolation itself, even before you ever encounter the xenomorph.
Oh, absolutely. The game creates this constant sense of dread that lingers with you long after you've put the controller down, and I think a lot of that comes from the setting itself. Sevastopol Station, orbiting this massive gas giant.
So we're not talking about some sleek futuristic space station.
No, think more like decaying malfunctioning, full of these eerie sounds, and the game uses that environment brilliantly. You're trapped in this massive, unforgiving structure, hurtling through space.
It's like the station itself is a character.
Exactly. It's not just telling you about the danger, it's making you experience it firsthand.
And then, of course, there's the xenomorph itself. Now, this isn't some predictable enemy with a set patrol route, is it?
Oh, God, no. One of the most terrifying things about Alien, isolation, is how the xenomorph's AI actually learns from you, learns from your actions, which means every encounter is different. You can't just memorize patterns or exploit the same trick every time.
So if I get a little too comfortable relying on my trust and motion tracker.
It might just learn to pick up on that sound.
Oh, no.
And if you keep hiding in the same spot, well, it's going to start checking there more often.
That's terrifying. No wonder people call it one of the most intense survival horror games ever. It feels like the developers really wanted players to feel that survival aspect, not just the action.
Exactly. And it's really driven home by their choice to use a first-person perspective. Remember that iconic tracking scene in the original Alien film?
Yeah.
It's like they took that concept and just ran with it for the entire game.
So you're not just watching the character experience this nightmare, you are the character.
You are there, feeling every heartbeat, every gasp for air, and that just heightens the fear and claustrophobia in a way that wouldn't be possible otherwise.
Talk about immersive. Speaking of immersive, one of the sources mentioned a sequence that really emphasizes that feeling of being stranded in space. Something about an EVA suit?
Ah, the EVA section. One of the best parts of the game.
Yeah.
You have to go outside of Sevastopol to make some repairs, right? But it's not some big action set piece. It's actually the opposite.
Really?
It's like 20 minutes of just you floating in the vast emptiness of space. You've got the station behind you, this massive gas giant looming in the distance, and the sound of your own breathing inside the suit.
Wow. One of the articles we looked at called it a spacewalking simulator. And honestly, that sounds like an experience in itself.
It is. It captures that vulnerability and awe of being surrounded by something so immense. The slow movements, the limited visibility, it all adds to the realism.
It really does sound like they went above and beyond to make Alien Isolation a completely immersive experience.
Absolutely. But, like with any game, it had its criticisms. And in some cases, those criticisms were brutal.
You're talking about that IGN review, right? The one that gave it a 5.9.
The one and only.
Yeah, I mean, that review still stings for a lot of Alien Isolation fans. It feels like IGN really missed the mark with that one.
Yeah, a lot of people felt like IGN just didn't get what the game was going for.
Like they were expecting some kind of action-packed space opera, and instead they got this really tense psychological thriller.
Exactly. They were complaining that it was too long and frustrating. But isn't that kind of the point of survival horror? The tension, the dread?
Yeah, not every game needs to be a non-stop thrill ride. Sometimes those quieter, suspenseful moments are way more effective. And Alien Isolation seems to nail those.
Totally. And you know what's worse? That low score might have actually hurt the game.
You mean in terms of sales?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard to say for sure, but some people think that IGN's review scared away a lot of potential players, especially coming from such a big outlet.
And that might be why we never got a sequel.
It's definitely possible. All those sources you sent mentioned a ton of unrealized potential, like all these cool ideas for sequels and expansions that never saw the light of day.
No way. That's such a shame.
It really is. One of the biggest missed opportunities was the lack of post-game content. Stuff like cheat codes or extra game modes.
So after you survive Sevastopol, you've outsmarted the xenomorph, you're finally ready to just bask in your victory.
Right. But then what? What if you're not quite ready to say goodbye to that world? What if you want to experience the game in a new way?
Instead of just replaying the same campaign.
Exactly. Imagine having cheat codes that let you mess around with the game's mechanics, or like new game modes with fresh challenges.
So you could like crank up the xenomorph spawn rate to 11 and turn Sevastopol into total chaos.
Exactly. Or even go the opposite direction. Unlimited resources. A totally stress-free playthrough where you can just explore and experiment. It's all about giving players options.
Even if those options are kind of goofy, like filters that make the game look like an old VHS tape, or
I don't know about a big head mode for the xenomorph, but I get what you're saying.
okay, maybe not. But you get the idea. These little extras might seem insignificant, but they add so much replay value. It's a way for players to engage with the game on a whole new level.
For sure. Too bad those features never made it in.
Maybe if we all wish really hard, we'll get some kind of Alien Isolation revival someday, complete with all the bells and whistles.
A fan can dream.
Yeah.
But even without those extras, it's clear that Alien Isolation is a phenomenal horror game.
We've talked about the atmosphere, the AI, that infamous IGN review, but what about the actual difficulty? One article you sent mentioned a nightmare mode that sounds absolutely terrifying.
Nightmare mode is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, if you thought the game was intense on normal difficulty, this mode kicks everything up a notch. Or 5.
Let's hear it. How so?
Okay, so first of all, resources are incredibly scarce. Like, we're talking desperately searching every nook and cranny for just a scrap of ammo. And the xenomorph, even more relentless.
Oh, no!
Oh, and the motion tracker, your one reliable tool for avoiding that thing. Practically useless.
You're kidding.
I'm dead serious. You're forced to rely on your own senses. Sound cues, pure instinct. It's like trying to navigate a minefield blindfolded.
Just listening to you describe it is giving me anxiety.
It's brutal, but that's what makes it so effective. Nightmare mode isn't for everyone, but for players who want the ultimate test of skill and nerve, it's the definitive Alien Isolation experience.
A true battle for survival. And to make things even more stressful, you've got that manual save system to deal with.
Don't even get me started on the save system. Forget about your convenient checkpoints. In Alien Isolation, you have to find these specific save points that are hidden around Sevastopol.
Yeah.
So not only are you putting yourself at risk by stopping to save, but the actual act of saving the game becomes this whole event.
Because you're completely vulnerable while the game is safe.
Exactly. And that fear that the xenomorph is going to pop out at any second, it feels like an eternity. It's honestly a brilliant mechanic. It just ratchets up the tension even further.
Wow, even saving the game is a strategic decision. That's intense. It really seems like they thought of everything to keep the player on edge.
It's all part of what makes the game such a unique and terrifying experience. You really are surviving by your wits, not just your reflexes. And speaking of things that make it unique, that brings us to something the source material kept coming back to the incredible tension this game creates.
We've talked about the atmosphere, the AI, the first-person perspective, but it sounds like the real genius of Alien. Isolation is how it takes all those elements and builds this constant sense of dread.
Exactly. It's a masterclass in suspenseful horror. And it does it with like almost no jump scares, just the sound design, the oppressive atmosphere of Sevastopol, that constant threat of what might be lurking around the corner.
Like you're living in a horror movie.
The best kind of horror movie.
Speaking of movies, the articles you sent mentioned this whole debate about a potential sequel. Should it pick up directly from the first game or explore something totally new?
Right. There are definitely some loose ends at the end of Alien Isolation. But I can also see the appeal of a fresh start. You know, new cast, new setting, but with that same terrifying gameplay.
It's tough to say which direction would be better. Maybe that's part of what makes Alien. Isolation's so interesting. Even all these years later, it still gets people talking.
It's a testament to the impact it's had on survival horror. And even if we never get an official sequel, Alien, Isolation proved that atmosphere and tension can be just as effective as any action sequence.
Well said. So to wrap things up for our listeners today, if you're tired of horror games that rely on cheap jump scares and want something truly immersive and unforgettable, Alien Isolation is the game for you.
And if you do decide to brave the darkness, maybe keep the lights on.
Solid advice. Until next time, keep exploring those fascinating corners of the digital world. And if you ever want to delve deep into a topic that'll send shivers down your spine, you know where to find us.
See you next time.